Imagine the youth in your life feeling motivated and excited to learn and grow. They contribute to the home, engage actively in their learning, and consider ways they can find a sense of belonging and significance in their community. Hello, I am Terry Novacek, and this is Element is Everything, where we discuss topics associated with finding your element, that place where interests and talents collide to bring good things to yourself and others. The book, The Self-Driven Child, in my opinion, should be required reading for every parent and educator. If we could only read one book as a society, this would be the one, solving all of society's ills. Okay, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it really is a life-changing book. Dr. Stixrud, one of the authors, has become a friend of our organization, having served as a keynote speaker. He's facilitated a parent workshop, he's joined us as a guest on our podcast, and he's even attended our book club. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Ned Johnson, the other author of the book, to hear the latest research behind motivation and agency. It's great to meet you. In some ways, I feel like I know you just through Bill and through reading the book.
He and I think a lot alike.
Yeah, so it's very exciting to now get your perspective on things. And it's been 3 years now since we interviewed Bill about the book. And I understand he has another book coming out. Are you working with him on that?
Yeah, so he and I had a second book that came out called What Do You Say? How to Talk with Kids to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and a Happy Home. Actually, we like that book a lot. It, like a lot of things that dropped during COVID, it disappeared a little bit. And we just handed it into our publisher, or our editor, I should say, a third book that's kind of a workbook. I'm trying to based on 7 principles from the self-driven child, and kind of reflections and work that parents can do if they try to kind of more deeply inhabit the principles of the self-driven child and their role as parents.
That's great. And when does that one expected to come out?
That'll come out February of 25.
Okay, great. Well, I look forward to seeing that one. And I have not read the What Do You Say, so I'll be ordering that one today.
Oh yeah, well, it was mostly based on kind of people really like some of the language in the self-driven child. I love you too much to fight you about your homework.
Yeah.
It's your decision makers, this kind of thing. But invariably, people would say this all makes complete sense. But in this particular moment, tell me what to say. And so we worked up kind of the scenarios that any of us as parents will often find ourselves in, what we might reflexively say, kind of why that might sometimes miss the mark, and what we might say instead. So that was really neat. And then there are a couple things in there, things we hadn't realized before we wrote The Self-Driven Child. There's a chapter called The Language and Silence of Change. And the idea behind it is that a lot of times when parents are saying, how do I motivate my kid? What they're really saying is, how do I change my kid? And of course, we can't change people against their will. We can make it so painful that they will give in, but then that's a different energy. And so we kind of do a deep dive on Ellie Leibowitz's The Space Program, and something called motivational interviewing, which is you may know this, a really effective way, first created by a couple of psychologists working with problem drinkers in the 80s, of how do you help people when they're kind of stuck. Meaning that, a kid who's not doing well in school has reasons to work harder, but ambivalently may have reasons to not work harder. And what do we do to effectively help kids get unstuck? For me, that's been the most interesting set of tools that I've tried to understand better and employ when I'm working with young people, including my own.
Yeah, well, and that's what I was hoping to talk to you about today. Our schools are charter schools, so they're schools of choice, kind of an alternative. And for a while, I thought maybe this was unique to us, that parents were bringing unmotivated kids because they weren't doing well in the regular schools. And now I'm realizing that it's everywhere. And
Oh yeah,
article after article after
yeah.
article and study after study after study, the anxiety, the depression, the lack of motivation. I mean, I don't think it's one thing, and my intent is not to finger point, but I definitely would like to get your perspective on what is this perfect storm? What are all these things that are playing into this, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people write about this. I mean, Jenny Wallace has the book out, Never Enough, about helping kids feel like they matter. Jonathan Haidt's new book, the title of which, The Anxious Generation, I believe, is the title. And if you've read this, it's, I've not read the book itself yet. There's a beautiful article in The Atlantic about this. And the basic gist of it is he blames the cell phone and not social media generally, but the smartphone, and really looks at it from a developmental perspective. And I'll walk through it as I understand his argument, which I think is a pretty credible one, and then kind of add my own flavor to this. And he says, when you look at how do children historically development, how do children develop? And principally, it's through play. It's through one-on-one time with peers and siblings and parents and grandparents. It's through meaningful challenges and then enough sleep to recover from that. And when you think about what the cell phone has done of, so much of what should be unstructured play, and by play, I should just define that for a moment, following the work of Peter Gray, play by definition is not adult directed, but almost every young person who's grown up in the last 15 years, their experience of play has been adult directed. I was talking with a school out your way where it's an entire school, and the irony of this is just breathtaking. It's a school-based curriculum all the way up through into middle school, and they are hiring people. Parents can hire play consultants to teach kids how to play.
Oh, wow.
Oh my, oh my, right?
Yeah.
One of the things a lot of adult directed, but also the problem with cell phones, and when you would pick on video games, is that is rather than kids exploring on their own, it sort of pulls kids along, and it's not free play. It's within the confines of the game or the phone or the app or whatever it happens to be. Self time on screens obviously replaces, time outside, time in nature, time face to face. And it's not just kids on phones, it's parents on phones as well, and it messes with sleep and just all kinds of things. So I think his argument is he is a social psychologist, very well argued. If you add to it, what I think Bill and I would add to this is the brain development that goes along with that. So when you think about motivation, right, we want kids not to be motivated externally by someone trying to pull them along or push them along, but rather by their own interest in doing things. I had a great interview, if you know Lenore Skenazy, she of the Free Range Parent, and she is with Jonathan Haidt and Peter Gray, part of the letgrow.org, I think is their website. And so she had a piece in the New York Times at the start of the school year about maybe this is a secret to childhood anxiety. And it was simply this: to let kids take on things that they want to do where they're intrinsically motivated, even as we as parents go, oh gosh, this could go really sideways. Kids may not appreciate the ways that this could be stressful. But if they're naturally driven to do something and they experience stress along the way, they have a motivation or a motivator to tangle with the parts that are hard, that are stressful, in order to get the outcome that they want. So she said, if a family lives on Long Island and they want to take a train all the way to the city, parents are imagining my kid will get mugged, they'll get, everything that could possibly go wrong. But the kid is putting him or herself in stressful, novel situations, right? And so what I pointed out to Lenore in this, and I've not read Jonathan Haidt's book yet, is that from a brain perspective, when we have a motivation to do something and there's an obstacle or a natural stressor, we have a reason to do this. And it's by dealing with something that's hard, that's stressful, that's novel, that whatever, that, we're wiring a brain to be able to cope with things that are hard. And so when I think about what's going on with kids all across the world, really, I mean, our book sold in our book sold in China. We had to write a new preface for it because different culture. Someone over there, a guy, and I think his name is Fan Deng, if I have that right. He's sort of like the Oprah, the Chinese equivalent of Oprah. He wrote a, he did a review of this and did a 1 hour talk based on the principles. As of October of last year, about a year into this, been viewed 39 million times, and they'd sold something close to 1 million books in China. And so China's a pretty different, it's not exactly the US or Canada, right?
Right.
See the same problems with young people who are struggling with motivation to get themselves out of, out of bed and work hard on building their lives, or who are so anxious that they want to kind of stay at home with their, on their phone, probably with their head, under the covers as well. And so our take on this is there are macro forces there. I mean, it's not the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? It's all of these things collectively. And so for me, I think about this as what is the sum total of inflows of stress into a nervous system, into a family unit, into a school, into a community? What are the healthy outflows of stress? And if those things aren't in balance, we get some pretty bad outcomes. And the whole while knowing that young people are developing that are wiring the brains that they'll carry into adulthood. And for some reason, we're not doing a good enough job. As Bill, we were working on a lecture called Brainless Education. Uh, and it made the point that when you look at what goes on in most schools, certainly public schools and even most independent schools, it seems that they don't realize all the insights that have been made about how, the last 40 years of what we've learned about how brains develop. Either that or they don't care, because all the effort seems to be what do we cram into kids' heads and how do we do the cramming, not developing the brain into which, the repository for all this knowledge. So um, I'm loath to blame schools. I'm loath to blame teachers. I'm loath to blame parents. I'm not that unreserved in my concern or condemnation of what's being pumped out of Silicon Valley. But we, like you, I think, talk with parents and talk with schools because, um, from my perspective, I want to focus on what I can do as a parent or as an educator. Because if I wait for, Meta to straighten out its act, it's another decade worth of kids. So it's a both, right? We need to focus on that, legislation, all kinds of things. But in the meantime, how do we as parents employ tools? How do we help our kids have tools to navigate this world, including technology, in a way that's more healthy than we're currently doing? So that was a long answer to a short question.
No, that was great. You mentioned Silicon Valley, and it makes me think of what I've read that the folks that work there, their children do not have devices.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have this in our second book that there were 300 psychologists who petitioned the American Psychological Association asking that they formally censure, excuse me, the psychologists who were employed by Silicon Valley to knowingly make these apps and devices and technologies as addictive as they possibly could, knowing what they know about intermittent reinforcement and how brains develop and dopamine receptors and on it goes, that it was a violation of the Hippocratic Oath because they
Yeah.
were doing harm. So yeah.
I was just talking to somebody the other day, and I came out of a meeting that, included a student and a parent, and it's just one more of these similar meetings. And I was telling this colleague, I said, what happened to us as humans that we have lost the natural skill to parent our young? Like, the giraffes can still do it. The hippopotamus can still do it. Even the domesticated dogs and cats still do it. But what you're saying here is, all of this technology, well, that's the difference. The dogs and the cats are not yet, they
Well,
aren't using those devices.
excellent point. And there's one other thing. There's a wonderful book of Robert Sapolsky, if you don't know his work yet, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
Oh, that's funny.
So the basic idea is if you were you a zebra, what does your day consist of? Oh, hey, there's some grass. Let's go over and eat that grass. Maybe let's go get some water. Let's hope we don't get taken out by an alligator to get water. There's some more grass, and it's all fine. You're just eating breakfast, and it's just that occasionally some other animal might be looking for breakfast that includes you, and so a lion runs after you, and you run as a pack of zebras and ideally or herd, whatever it is, and get away from them. And most of the time, you'll get away. And I'm sure it's a little terrifying, probably exhilarating. But as soon as your breathing comes back to normal, you're sort of like, hey, is that grass? Because other animals mostly lack the kind of prefrontal cortex that we have that allows us to project ourselves into the future, sharpen some pointy sticks and fend off, lions, and fast forward a few million years, now we all have cell phones, right? We have the ability to ruminate on the past. It allows us to learn, but also to make ourselves depressed, to project ourselves in the future, which allows us to plan, but it also allows us to stress. And so, we're the only animal that can literally make ourselves sick just by our just by our own thoughts, right?
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things that's hard, as parents, we understandably think a lot about our kids and where they're going to end up and what they're going to be and do and everything else. And when we start to make ourselves crazy, we'll make our kids crazy because we start wanting to control things because we're worried about this or that outcome. But when we exert a greater sense of control, by definition, there's less sense of control for our kids. And so it's hard, particularly in a world that feels stressful, and for parents to be less anxious. But this is why Bill and I talk about and take really seriously this idea of being a non-anxious presence. And as Bill pointed out, try to soothe an infant when you're worked up. You know,
Right.
try to help your spouse or your son or your daughter. If you're as upset as they are, it can't be done. There's a story in our second book. My twin brother is a paramedic, and this is a hack that a lot of a lot of people in emergency medicine use. So he was on scene, and some people don't call an ambulance when things are going well, right? So whatever it was not going well, and the family of the poor family of this person were just super stressed out. And my brother was not, in part because this wasn't new to him, and he had a sense of control because he has the tools for this. But he turned to them, and as warmly as he could, he said, I can see how worried you are. For what it's worth, I'm not worried because I think we've got this under control. If it would help you, I can let you know when you really should panic, right? And that, of course, changes the energy quite dramatically. But we're in a place right now where kids are stressed, which makes parents stressed, and then teachers are stressed, and we keep kind of infecting one another, and we
Yes.
don't have enough people, in my view, who kind of serve that role of saying, I get that you're upset and you're pretty pissed off about A, B, C, and D. For what it's worth, I see it pretty differently, and I don't think I need to be as upset about this as some other people might. And that alone can help. My my son. This is delightful. I was recording the audiobook for What He Say, and our son, who's now 22, was a camp counselor. I come out of the studio. I called my wife to let her know how this had gone. He said, "Hey, did you got how's Matthew doing?" Because he'd been starting to have what looked like migraines. And we get him on the phone, and we're talking. I mean, how much ibuprofen is too much? You're getting enough water? How's your sleep? And he drops a word. Interesting. Talks a few more sentences. Drops another word. Few sentences later, total gibberish. I think he's having a stroke. I'm a little worried. Call my wife, said, "Hey, sweetheart, please call me on the line. Don't hang up because we're connected with you. Matthew, I'll be right back." She goes off, calls 911, gets the camp director. Fast forward, brain tumor. He's fine now. He's great now, but holy smokes.
Yeah.
And so we asked him, over the Christmas vacation, what did he remember about this? Because he's a music major. He'd written some music about it. And he talked about the life flight helicopter and this and that. And I said, "You remember talking to mom and me, when your language started getting a little, wonky?" And he said, I do. And I said, "What do you remember?" And he said, "How freakishly calm you were,"
Oh,
right? Because
yeah.
when things are going poorly, I mean, if you went in your doctor's like, "Oh my God," I mean,
Yeah.
it's not going to
Yeah.
help
That's
you.
a
Not going to help you. We're like, yeah, this is pretty serious. We've got a plan for this, and here's what we're going to do. Um, but I feel like right now, a lot of people, um, it's just not intuitive for enough people that when things aren't going well with someone that they care about, that one of the most helpful things that they can do is to be less anxious, even when it's a disaster. and to say, I'm confident. I never say I know. I'm confident there's a way that we can make this better, whatever that is, whatever that is. And I don't feel like I don't feel like I see enough of that. um, as much as I'd like to see, from leadership, whether it's school or, political level or whatever. But it strikes me that currently it seems to be a fashion that we think the people who are the loudest are the ones who are the strongest. Um, and I see that differently.
Yeah. Yeah, a good point. Well, it's funny, you see people wearing the hats and the t-shirts that all say be calm and carry on and all that
Mm,
kind of stuff. And
yeah, there's something to it.
yeah. And so that's the way to break that chain. So somebody listening to this, whether you're a teacher or a parent, or even, a teenage student, what are three things that you feel? I mean, you just mentioned one, as
Mm,
basically you're saying um, your anxiousness is not going to make it any better. Um, so maybe that's just some words that you say to yourself. But what are some three things that people can do to break this chain?
yeah. So one of the things really quickly about the idea of a non-anxious presence is that, and I want to be really gentle because if you're a parent and things are really going bad for your kid, of course you're worried. You're wired to protect your kid. You're wired to soothe your kid. If you go into education obviously for the enormous stock options, right? And the corporate jet. No, I mean, you go into this because you care about kids. And so when things aren't going well, it makes all the sense in the world that you become anxious about the path that this kid is on as well. But we should focus on it's really the path that we're worried about, because when we worry about a child, it typically isn't about what's going on today, that their best friend broke up with them, or they got cut from the soccer team, or they're failing all their classes. It's not really typically so much where they are, but where we think that they'll end up, that they'll never have friends, that they'll never feel successful, that they'll never find their thing, that they'll never get on an academic path, that they'll never find a way to contribute in the world. And the challenge is when we buy into that kind of fear based thinking in the moment, it makes it harder for kids to get themselves unstuck. Because if you could say credibly to any child you work on, this sucks right now. I get how upset you are. I understand how hard this is. And I'm confident that you're going to end up in a good place. I don't know when and I'm not sure how, but we're going to work on this. But everything that I can see is you already have the stuff within your head to live the kind of life that you want. We just got to work hard at this. Because when we get anxious, it makes the other person, in this case a kid, more anxious. And this is important. The major manifestation of anxiety is avoidance. Anxiety also scrambles all of our executive functions. So our ability to plan, to problem solve, to get ourselves out of the situation that we're currently in. From a mental health perspective, cognitive flexibility, emotional flexibility. How can I find a way to reframe this and to look at this in a different light? So yes, it sucks, and this it sucks, but I'm going to get to a different place. And curiously, when we can be like, someone's grandmother's like, there, sweetheart, sure this is going to work out, right? So that that alone brings kids' prefrontal cortexes back online. It makes it easier for them to be flexible in their thinking, easier for them to find a solution to their own problems. So it's a really big deal. The second thing that I would say is a lot of times when a lot of the angst that I see with parents and with educators is about kids not engaging in school. And how do I get them to work harder? How do I get them to understand how serious it is? How do I get them to be motivated? And they're almost always saying, how do I get him to be motivated for this thing he may not give a rat's patooey about? From my perspective, I go back to brain development, go back to brain development, go back to brain development. And you may recall in the self-driven child, we have a whole chapter there on motivation. And one of the things that I love most in there is a researcher named Reed Larson who examined in the 90s how is it that adolescents become intrinsically motivated. So rather than they'll respond to threats and to rewards, right, carrots and sticks, how do they not just work hard but want to work hard, and all the way along develop a brain system that's prepared to work hard, to set meaningful goals and work hard to pursue them. And he described it as not dutifully doing their homework, but the passionate pursuit of pastimes. And most kids do homework because, well, I'll give you this great story. Kid was asking me about using AI to do his homework. And what did I think about that? And I said, well, what do you think about homework? He said, what do you mean? I said, what do you get out of homework? Well, I guess I get points if I complete it. Okay, great. Any other reason this in this case, math, this homework helps you? I guess I do better on my tests. Great. Any other reason you do math homework? And he looked at me like blankly. And I said, does doing math homework help you get better at math? He said, oh, I guess so. Right. It wasn't anywhere on his radar. And the same day, a boy came and his parents are wanting to talk to me about tutoring him in math. And I said, what's your interest? Because he had another math tutor and they're looking to make a change. I said, what's your interest in having a math tutor? He said, I want to understand this math better because my teacher just doesn't teach in a way that I'm learning it very well. I said, golly, I said, you're like the first person to say that in years. I said, it's a fantastic motivation. I said, is that why your parents want you to be here? He said, no, they want me to get A's in math.
Mm.
So when I think about this, when we think about this idea of a passionate pursuit of pastimes, it's that many kids, far too many kids, and you, of course, know this from the, the kids who leave, a traditional public school and move to charter schools because they want to have a different experience. That most kids do homework because they're checking a box and they're trying to get some adult, their parents or their teacher, off their back or be less stressed or just to leave them alone. But they're not really deeply engaged in it. And one of the reasons this matters so much to me is you can look at the brain system involved when people are intrinsically motivated versus extrinsically motivated. And the most interesting one to me is to what degree do people pay attention to how they're doing? To what degree they pay attention to their mistakes? So, simple example, if you have a kid who's playing piano or guitar or whatever and taking lessons, what's the typical thing that happens in America, right? You've got to practice a half an hour a day, otherwise, mom will whatever. So if the kid doesn't really want to practice piano, but is being dragged to lessons and has been told he has to practice half an hour a day, what is he doing while he's practicing the piano? Only 28 minutes to go.
Right.
20, can the freaking clock move faster? He's looking at the clock the whole time, barely at the music or his hands or whatever you're supposed to do when you learn to play piano. As opposed to if you were in a rock and roll band, or if he was, she was going to play a solo at the school talent show, and there's some person who she thinks is really cute and really wants to impress this person. She practices, plays a note wrong, oops, goes back and corrects it, plays it, gets the tempo wrong, corrects it, because she really wants to do her best at sounding like friggin' Taylor Swift. So whoever this hottie is thinks that this girl is all that. Now we're talking about a different motivational system. So I say this because if you have a kid who seems to not give a fig about school, it's hard not to worry. And from our experience, as long as they're working hard to get better and better at something that really matters to them, I don't think we have to worry. Because at least in public schools, children will forget within 3 months 90% of what they've been taught. So it's really not the learning that matters. It's the brain development, the executive functions that matter. And we can get those just as credibly by practicing hard for music for the talent show as we can from completing some worksheet to make all the anxious adults be less anxious.
Play is our natural way to learn. And when we do not allow our children, or even ourselves, the time to engage in unstructured play, we deprive our brains the opportunity to build those synapses that develop our creativity and our sense of self, as well as building skills in emotional regulation, problem solving, and social interactions. Why should we care? Because this is about quality of life and our existence as a society. We have the power to shape our brains in a way that brings us a sense of belonging and significance. So let's do it. Here's your element challenge. Keep a log of how much of your recreational time your child and you spend on a device, and how much of that recreational time you engage in something requiring more whole body engagement and interaction with others. Each day, try to move the needle so that more time is spent in the simple pleasures of play and interacting with others each day. With each minute of play you add, you just may find yourself moving closer to your element.